he just collapsed.
Are you a doctor?
I'm a paramedic. Everyone
Chaos
stand back.
broke loose the moment Edward Kane staggered back from the boardroom table and crashed against the polished wall. His executives shouted his name, chairs screeched backward, and a glass of water toppled over and shattered on the marble floor. No one knew what was happening. Edward's hand clutched at his throat as if trying to hold something invisible inside, and his eyes rolled upward. Someone screamed for help. Another dialed emergency services with trembling fingers. Within seconds, paramedics burst in, their boots pounding like a drumbeat of urgency across the echoing room. Oxygen masks, flashing lights, rapid commands. Everything moved with a frantic rhythm. His vitals don't match what we're seeing, one paramedic muttered. What does that even mean? A board member shouted, voice cracking. The paramedic didn't answer. He looked confused himself, checking the monitor a second time as Edward convulsed weakly. The boardroom door slammed open as they hauled him out. Staff members whispered, cried, or simply froze. No one understood how a man who seemed perfectly fine minutes earlier was now collapsing in front of them. At the edge of the chaos, Grace Awara, Edward Kane's longtime housekeeper, stood silently, wiping her hands on her apron. She had come to the office only to drop off documents Edward forgot at home. She was supposed to be invisible just like always. But as she watched him wheeled out on a stretcher, something inside her tightened painfully. She had seen him tired, stressed, and angry before. She had never seen him helpless. He had always appeared unshakable. This wasn't normal. A paramedic shouted for everyone to move. Grace stepped aside, but her eyes never left Edward's face. She whispered his name, but no one noticed. Later, at the hospital, the corridors smelled of disinfectant and dread. Grace sat stiffly in the waiting area, her hands clasped, knuckles white. Doctors rushed in and out of Edward's private suite, their clipped medical jargon floating down the hallway in fragments. Neurological instability, elevated enzymes, inconsistent cardiac rhythm. Every phrase made Grace's stomach twist. A young doctor brushed past her, and she finally gathered the courage to speak. "Excuse me, sir. Please, what is happening to Mr. Kane?" "We don't know yet," he replied, barely glancing at her before disappearing through the swinging door. His words stung, but not as much as his dismissiveness. She wasn't family. She wasn't a doctor. She wasn't important. She was just the housekeeper. But she cared about Edward. Much more than these strangers who now swarmed around him like bees that didn't know where the hive was. Inside the room, a swarm of specialists surrounded Edward's bed. Cardiologists, neurologists, toxicologists. Machines beeped steadily, but his body looked wrong. Too still, too pale, too drained. Grace hovered at the doorway while the lead neurologist, Dr. Renaud, examined Edward's trembling eyelids. Dr. Patel, the cardiologist, studied the monitor with a frown. Nurses adjusted tubes and 4 lines in a blur of motion. And then there was Nurse Victor Hale. Tall, calm, expression unreadable. He moved with an eerie precision, like every action had been practiced 1,000 times. His voice was soft, almost soothing, and he answered questions before anyone finished asking them. The other nurses seemed to trust him without hesitation. Grace didn't. Something about him made her uneasy, though she couldn't explain why. She watched him closely as he handled Edward's 4. He pressed his thumb to the line, eyes narrowed slightly, and just then, Edward's eyes fluttered in a strange, unnatural way, as if reacting to something happening inside his body. Grace gasped softly. No one else noticed. She took a small step forward. "Excuse me. Did you see that? His eyes." Victor didn't even look at her. "He's reacting to the medications," he said coolly. "Perfectly normal." But it didn't feel normal. Grace bit her lip and retreated to the chair in the corner, observing quietly. She had worked in Edward's mansion for 15 years. She knew when something was off. She wasn't a doctor, but she knew how Edward responded to discomfort, stress, and even fear. What she just saw wasn't any of those things. It was something different. Hours passed. Machines beeped, Doctors argued. Nurses scribbled notes. Still, no one understood why Edward's condition worsened when he was awake yet improved when unconscious. They tested for autoimmune issues, performed scans, ruled out infections, checked his heart repeatedly. Everything came back normal or contradicting. Grace brought in some of Edward's personal items. A blanket he liked, a small framed picture of his late wife, and the book he was reading the night before. She placed them carefully on the bedside table. As she adjusted the blanket, she noticed small bruises on Edward's forearm. Tiny, circular, almost hidden. She frowned. She had not seen those earlier. She reached out to touch one gently, but Victor appeared behind her suddenly, his voice low. "You shouldn't examine the patient's body. Leave that to medical staff." Grace jerked her hand back. The cold tone of his voice sent a shiver through her. "I wasn't examining. I was checking on him," she whispered. His eyes bore into her for a moment. Then he turned away. Grace exhaled shakily. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. And for the first time she felt afraid. "Please," she murmured to herself. "Someone needs to help him before it's too late." As she sat back down, a group of doctors emerged from Edward's room, shaking their heads. "We're missing something," Dr. Renault said. "His symptoms don't line up with any known condition." Grace's heart hammered. She wanted to stand up and scream that something bad was happening. Something intentional. But who would listen? She was only the housekeeper. Still, she leaned forward, hoping someone would notice her concern. But no one did. A moment later, Victor passed in front of her again, pushing a cart of medications. Their eyes met. His remained cold and unreadable. And just then, subtle, almost imperceptible, he smiled. A small, chilling curl of the lips. Grace's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just a medical mystery. This was something far darker. And the man the doctors trusted most might be the one they should fear. If you're still watching this, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. Trust me, you're going to want to stay until the end. Grace didn't leave the hospital that night. She couldn't. Something gnawed at her. A quiet voice whispering inside her mind that Edward wasn't just sick. He was being pulled toward death by invisible hands. She paced the hallway, clutching her phone, hoping for a miracle or a sign, or anything that would make sense of the nightmare unfolding around her. Around midnight, the doctors finally allowed her to see Edward alone. His room was dimly lit, monitors softly beeping like distant echoes. Grace sat beside him, holding his cold hand in both of hers. "Mr. Kane," she whispered, "please fight. You've survived so much. Don't let this take you." His eyelids twitched, but he didn't respond. She wiped a tear away. It was rare for her to cry. She had lived a life that taught her to swallow pain quietly. But seeing Edward like this, so fragile, so unlike the strong man she knew, cracked her heart. A soft creak pulled her from her thoughts. The door had opened slightly, and Victor slipped inside. Grace stiffened immediately. He approached the four-stand with the same smooth, emotionless confidence as before. "You shouldn't be here this late," he said without looking at her. Grace swallowed. I wasn't ready to leave." Victor adjusted a line, clicked something on the monitor. "Prolonged hospital presence from non-family members is discouraged. You're interfering with the medical environment." Grace frowned. "I'm not interfering. I'm caring." Victor lifted his gaze. His eyes were dark, hollow, empty of warmth. "Care can be inconvenient." Her breath hitched. She didn't know why those words terrified her, but they did. Victor checked the four-bag once more, scribbled something on Edward's chart, and walked out without another word. Grace waited until she was sure he was gone before she leaned closer to Edward. "What is he giving you?" she whispered. She scanned the labels on the four bags but didn't recognize most of the names. She wasn't trained for this. She couldn't protect Edward from medical decisions she didn't understand. But her instincts screamed that something was wrong. And instincts had kept her alive through many hardships. The next morning, chaos erupted again. Edward's vitals plummeted an hour after sunrise. Doctors swarmed his room, voices overlapping in frantic commands. Increase ventilator support. No, wait. His blood pressure. This doesn't match the labs. Why is his heart reacting this way? Grace stood in the corner, shaking. Victor was in the room already, moving too calmly for the situation. He handled syringes, changed the flow past instruments. His face was serene, almost peaceful, as if he knew something no one else understood. A doctor shouted, "We need another toxicology screen." Victor responded quickly, "Already did it. Nothing unusual." His voice was too smooth, too ready. Grace narrowed her eyes. She stepped closer, just close enough to see him slipping something into his pocket. A small vial. Her heart clenched. Victor turned slightly, and for a flash, she caught his expression. Cold annoyance, like a predator interrupted during a hunt. Grace backed away, pulse racing. Later, when the crisis calmed, Dr. Renault approached her. He rubbed his temples, exhausted. "Grace, we're doing everything we can, but we're missing a piece. Something isn't adding up." Grace took a trembling breath. "Doctor, there's something you need to know." She told him what she saw. The bruises, the strange reactions, the vial. Dr. Renault frowned. "You're suggesting Nurse Hale is doing something improper?" "I'm not suggesting. I'm telling you what I saw." He sighed heavily. "Grace, Victor Hale is one of the best nurses in this hospital. Clean record, impeccable credentials. You're stressed. You want answers. But accusing medical staff." "I am not accusing," she snapped, tears filling her eyes. "I am begging you to pay attention. Something is wrong." Dr. Renault placed a hand on her shoulder. "Go home. Get some rest. We'll monitor everything closely." He didn't believe her. Grace turned away, cheeks burning, throat tight. She wanted to scream. She wanted to shake him until he saw what she saw. But she couldn't force them to listen. As she walked toward the elevator, she saw Victor standing at the far end of the hallway, watching her. No smile, no expression, just watching. She inhaled sharply and stepped into the elevator quickly, her hands trembling as the doors closed. That evening, she sat in her small staff apartment within Edward's estate, staring at her reflection in the mirror. She felt helpless, powerless. She thought of the years spent serving Edward, planning his meals, managing the staff, listening when he was lonely, laughing with him on good days, comforting him on bad days. He wasn't just an employer. He was family in his own way, and someone wanted him dead. She opened his laptop, hoping to find something. A clue, a reason, anything. As she browsed through his emails, one stood out. Repeated messages from a corporate rival named Conrad Duval. Subtle threats disguised as business negotiations. Dark reminders of what Edward would lose if he didn't cooperate. She dug deeper and found encrypted financial transfers from an unknown account. One name appeared repeatedly. H. Vale. Her eyes widened. H. Vale. Victor Hale. Her hands shook as she whispered, "Dear God." The next day, she returned to the hospital determined. She wasn't going to let fear stop her. She walked down the hallway, scanning every room until she reached Edward's. She froze. The door was slightly open, and inside, Victor stood beside Edward's again, holding a syringe. Grace's heart leapt to her throat. "What are you doing?" Victor turned slowly. That empty smile returned. "Administering medication." "You didn't log that bottle," she said, pointing at the syringe. Victor stepped toward her. "You're becoming very troublesome, Grace." Fear crushed her lungs. She backed up until her hand hit the wall. Victor inched closer. "You know too much," he whispered. "You've watched too much." Her hand slid along the wall, searching for anything she could use to defend herself. Her fingers brushed a metal button. Without thinking, she slammed her palm onto it. A shrill alarm burst through the room. A code blew. Doctors rushed in instantly. Victor stepped back, face twisting with fury, before he masked it behind a professional calm. "What did you do?" Dr. Patel shouted. Grace pointed at Victor, voice shaking but strong. "He was injecting something that wasn't logged. Check his pockets. Check the Check everything. Victor opened his mouth to defend himself, but for the first time, the doctors didn't look convinced. And for the first time, Grace felt hope. The room crackled with tension as doctors inspected Victor's pockets. Grace stood frozen, her breath shallow, every muscle tight. She half expected Victor to lash out, to grab her, to do something terrible. But he simply watched them with unnerving calm, like someone who had rehearsed every possible outcome. Dr. Patel pulled out the vial Grace had seen earlier. What's this? Victor didn't blink. A supplement for electrolyte balance. Dr. Patel frowned. Why isn't it logged? Victor's voice was smooth as silk. I was just about to record it when he nodded at Grace, pressed the code blue alarm unnecessarily and disrupted protocol. Another doctor murmured. He's right. This isn't a controlled substance. Grace's heart sank. No, she whispered. Look at his arm. Look at the bruises. Check the chart. He's been tampered with. Dr. Renaud sighed deeply. Grace, we can't accuse staff without proof. Victor folded his arms, looking almost bored. If we're done here, I'd like to resume patient care. A nurse returned the vial to the tray and nodded for the doctors to step outside to discuss the situation. Grace remained in the room, trembling. Victor glanced over his shoulder at her and mouthed silently. You're finished. Her blood ran cold. She backed away until her knees hit the visitor's chair. She sat down heavily, praying the doctors would see through him. But she knew now that Victor was too good at blending in, too good at manipulating the system. She needed undeniable proof. As the doctors left, Grace stayed behind. She didn't leave Edward's side. Even when Victor returned to the shift, she didn't care if he saw her watching. Fear battled with determination inside her, but determination won. Hours later, after a tense afternoon, Grace overheard a nurse whispering to another. Someone tore out pages from Mr. Kane's chart. Grace stepped toward them. Excuse me. What did you say? The nurse looked uncomfortable. Just clerical error, I guess. Who had the chart last? They exchanged uneasy glances but said nothing. Grace understood their silence. They were afraid or didn't want to get involved. She continued her quiet investigation throughout the day, staying alert for anything, any small detail. And then it happened. That night, around 1 a.m., Grace was walking down the dim corridor toward Edward's room with a cup of tea to stay awake when she heard a soft click inside. She froze. The door was ajar. She crept closer, heart pounding. Victor's voice drifted through the crack. Easy now, just a little more. Grace's pulse hammered in her ears. She pushed the door open a little more, just enough to see him standing over Edward with another syringe. She covered her mouth to stifle a gasp. Victor leaned down, whispering as if mocking him. You're a tough one, Mr. Kane, but everyone breaks. Grace stepped inside. Stop! Victor straightened slowly, expression chillingly composed. Why are you always in places you shouldn't be? I'm calling security, Grace said, her voice shaking but firm. No, you're not. His tone shifted deeper, darker. You need to mind your business. You're a housekeeper, Grace. Clean, cook, fold clothes. Leave the medical work to us. Grace's fear turned into anger. You don't scare me. Victor smirked. You should be terrified. Grace stumbled backward, turned, and ran. Her heartbeat was louder than the squeak of her shoes on the tiles. She didn't stop until she reached the parking lot, gasping for breath. The night was silent except for crickets. She bent over, hands on her knees, trying not to collapse. Then she heard footsteps, measured, calm. She spun around. Victor stood several feet away, no emotion in his eyes. You're following me? She asked, voice barely a whisper. You've become inconvenient, he said softly. People who pry into things they shouldn't often get hurt. Grace backed up until her back hit a car. What do you want from me? Cooperation. He took another step. Stop snooping. Stop asking questions. Go home. Stay out of the hospital. And if I don't? His voice dropped to a whisper. Then you'll join him. Grace felt her legs weaken. "You're not a nurse." It wasn't a question. Victor stared at her for a long moment, as if deciding whether to answer. Then he said, "Go home, Grace, while you still can." He walked past her, disappearing into the shadows as silently as he had appeared. Grace slid down the side of the car, shaking violently. Tears streamed down her face. Every instinct screamed that she had just survived something only by luck. She stared at the hospital doors, knowing she couldn't go back inside. Not that night. But she also knew she wasn't giving up. The next morning, she returned to the mansion to shower and change clothes. She barely slept. But as she walked past Edward's office, something tugged at her. She stepped inside and sat at his desk, trying to gather her thoughts. The laptop screen still glowed from the documents she had seen the night before. The mysterious payments, the encrypted emails, the threatening tone of Conrad Duval, a man desperate to take over Edward's business empire. She opened another folder labeled Legal. Inside were drafts of restraining orders, cease and desist notices, and a lengthy report titled Potential Sabotage Attempts, Internal Threat Assessment. Edward suspected someone was targeting him. Her stomach twisted. She clicked deeper, uncovering a list of suspicious names flagged by Edward's private investigator. At the top of the list, Hector Vale. Her heart stopped. The alias matched the encrypted transactions she found earlier. And then the truth hit her like a punch. Vale, Hector Vale, Victor Hale. The same initials, the same pattern of movement, the same intention. She whispered the name slowly, testing it. Hector, Victor. He had used a nearly identical alias. Enough to hide, but not enough to fool someone looking closely. She grabbed her phone, snapped photos of the documents, and rushed back to the hospital. By the time she reached Edward's floor, Victor was nowhere in sight. A different nurse was in the room. Grace approached cautiously. "Where is Victor Hale?" The nurse squinted. "Who?" Grace blinked. "Victor Hale. Tall, black hair, quiet." The nurse shook her head. "Ma'am, no one named Victor Hale works the night shift here." Grace felt faint. "No, he was here. All week." "How can you say he?" The nurse picked up an ID roster and flipped through it. "We've only got one male nurse on this rotation, and he's 45 years old. Not who you're describing." Grace's blood ran cold. She whispered, "He's been impersonating staff." The nurse looked alarmed. "I'm calling security." Before she could, Grace stepped into Edward's room and froze. The 4-bag hanging there had changed. A new label, a new substance, one she had never seen before. She whispered, "He came back." A chill swept through her. She touched Edward's hand. "I'll save you," she whispered, "even if no one else believes me." And as the machines beeped steadily in the silent room, Grace felt the truth settle over her like ice. She was the only one standing between Edward Kane and the man trying to murder him. If you're still watching, don't forget to hit the like button and leave a comment. Your support helps keep stories like this coming. Grace didn't waste another second. She marched straight to the nurse's station, heart pounding hard enough to bruise her ribs. The older male nurse on duty, a man with tired eyes and kind features, looked up from his paperwork. "Sir, please," Grace said, breathless. "I need you to check Edward Kane's 4. Someone tampered with it." The man frowned. "Tampered? Ma'am, that's a serious allegation." "I know," Grace insisted. "But the bag wasn't the same when I left last night. Someone changed it. Someone who shouldn't even be on staff." The nurse hesitated, then sighed. "All right, let's take a look." They walked together toward Edward's room. But when they entered, Grace froze. The 4-bag had changed again. The mystery label was gone, replaced with a standard saline bag. Her stomach dropped. No, that's not what I saw." The nurse shook his head gently. "Stress does things to the mind, ma'am." "I'm not imagining this." Grace snapped. "Someone is hurting him. Your staff roster doesn't even list Victor Hale, because he isn't your staff. He's an imposter." The nurse stared at her, stunned. "Wait, what? No, that can't be." But before he could finish, A voice spoke from behind them. Is there a problem? Grace turned slowly. Victor stood in the doorway. But he wasn't wearing scrubs this time. He wore a dark hoodie, jeans, and no ID badge. His hair was slicked back, exposing a sharper, colder expression than she had ever seen in the hospital. Grace's pulse spiked. She stepped back involuntarily. The nurse frowned. Sir, you can't be in this area without proper. Victor didn't even look at him. His eyes stayed locked on Grace. The nurse moved toward him. I'll need to see your credentials. Victor grabbed the nurse by the wrist and twisted with terrifying ease. The nurse yelped and dropped to one knee. Victor leaned in, voice chillingly calm. I'd leave the room if I were you. Grace gasped. Stop. Let him go. Victor shoved the nurse aside. He stumbled to the wall, clutching his wrist, stunned and disoriented. Victor stepped closer to Grace, each footstep slow and deliberate. Grace, he said softly, as if greeting an old friend. You're causing problems again. The nurse scrambled to his feet and bolted out the door, yelling for security. Grace stood frozen. Victor reached out, brushing a stray curl from her forehead in a gesture that made her skin crawl. You should have stayed home like I told you. Her voice barely escaped her throat. Why are you doing this? Who are you? He smiled. Someone with a job to finish. Grace's nails dug into her palms. Why Edward? What did he ever do to you? It's never personal, Victor said. Just business. And you? His eyes flicked over her trembling form. You're creating delays. He moved closer. Grace stumbled backward until she hit the side of Edward's bed. She grabbed the railing for support. Don't bother calling for help, Victor said calmly. Security won't get here in time. Grace swallowed. You think I'm just going to let you harm him again? Victor chuckled lightly. You can't stop me, Grace. Something snapped inside her. You think I'm weak because I'm a housekeeper, she said, voice shaking with fury. But I see everything. I remember everything. And I don't scare easily, not anymore. Victor raised an eyebrow. Brave words. Footsteps thundered down the hallway. Victor turned his head slightly, not fearfully, but with annoyance. Grace took that moment. She seized the metal water pitcher on the bedside table and swung it with every ounce of strength she had. It slammed into Victor's shoulder with a metallic crack. He staggered, eyes widening in shock. Grace didn't wait. She grabbed Edward's rolling tray table and shoved it hard into Victor's chest. He stumbled backward, slamming into the wall. Security burst through the doorway. Victor darted for the window instead of the door, his movements swift and practiced. He smashed the glass with his elbow. Alarms blared as the window shattered. Shards flew everywhere. Stop! One guard shouted. But Victor was already gone. Vanished into the night 4 stories below, landing on a lower ledge before dropping out of sight. The guards rushed to the window, scanning the darkness. Nothing. He was gone. Grace sank into a chair, shaking violently. Tears streamed down her face, not from weakness but from the overwhelming realization of how close she had come to death. One guard approached her gently. Ma'am, are you okay? No, she whispered. He's coming back. He won't stop until Edward is dead. The guard exchanged looks with the others. We'll station people outside the room at all times. No one goes in or out without clearance. Grace nodded weakly. She watched them secure the window, her heart racing. Later that afternoon, after the hospital replaced the broken glass and tightened security measures, Dr. Renaud invited Grace into his office. He looked pale, shaken. Grace. The nurse reported what happened. Security confirmed an intruder was on the floor last night. He wasn't an intruder, she said sharply. He was here for days. Dr. Renaud nodded reluctantly. We reviewed our camera logs. There are gaps. Several hours missing. Grace's nose flared. Victor deleted them. Dr. Renaud ran a hand over his face. I owe you an apology. You were right. Grace felt tears sting her eyes. Not from relief, but from exhaustion. We've contacted the police, he continued. They're launching an investigation into attempted homicide. Grace nodded, but her heart was only half in the conversation. Her mind replayed the look in Victor's eyes. The empty, terrifying certainty. He wasn't done. She returned to Edward's room and sat beside him again. Her hand rested over his. "Mr. Kane," she whispered. "I won't let him hurt you. I promise." Hours passed quietly. Nurses came and went under heavy supervision. But then Grace's phone vibrated on the table. A text from an unknown number. "You should have stayed out of this." Her hands shook. Another message came in. "I don't miss twice." Grace dropped the phone in horror. Grace's breath quickened as she stared at the threatening text. Her fingers felt numb, as if the message had drained every ounce of warmth from her body. She picked up the phone with trembling hands and turned it off immediately. There was no point blocking the number. Someone like Victor would simply find another way. She slipped the phone into her pocket and stood, pacing the room. Edward lay unconscious, unaware of the danger circling him like a predator. Grace moved closer, leaning over him. "I'm not giving up on you," she whispered. "I don't care what he threatens." The door suddenly creaked open. Grace spun around, fists clenched. It was only Dr. Renaud holding a tablet in his hands. He closed the door softly behind him. "Grace, there's something else you need to know." Her chest tightened. "What now?" Dr. Renaud pulled up a photo on his tablet and turned it toward her. It was a blurry security image, Victor in his stolen nurse uniform, caught mid-step before one of the camera feed outages. He knew exactly where every camera was located, Dr. Renaud said quietly, and he avoided each one with precision. "That's what trained killers do," Grace said, hating the words even as she said them. Dr. Renaud swallowed. "The police believe he may be connected to a series of mysterious medication-related deaths in other states. Cases we all thought were random. Until now." Grace stared at him. "He's done this before?" "Yes," Dr. Renaud whispered. "Many times." A chill slid down her spine like icy fingers. "Why Edward?" she asked. "Why target him?" "We don't know yet, but the detective assigned to his case is on the way. They want to ask you some questions." Grace nodded numbly. Before Dr. Renaud could continue, a nurse screamed from down the hallway. They both rushed to the door. A young male nurse stood there, pale as chalk. "What happened?" Dr. Renaud demanded. The nurse pointed toward the exit. "The guard posted outside this room, he's gone. We found his walkie-talkie on the floor. No sign of him." Grace felt the ground sway beneath her feet. "He took the guard," she whispered. "He's already inside the hospital." Security alarms began to blare again, echoing through the walls. Staff ran in frantic patterns. Grace slammed the door shut and locked it herself before anyone could react. "We need to move Edward," she said. "Now. If he gets in here." Dr. Renaud nodded sharply. "You're right. I'll get a gurney." He ran down the hall while Grace stayed behind, pressing her weight against the door even though she knew it wouldn't stop Victor if he really wanted to get in. Edward remained silent, unaware of the chaos around him. Grace whispered, "Hold on, please. I'm fighting for you." The door handle jiggled. Grace froze. The door was locked, but someone was testing it. "Dr. Renaud?" she said, voice cracking. No answer. Her heart hammered. "Who's there?" Still nothing. Silence filled the room, thick and suffocating. Grace stepped back slowly, inching toward Edward. The handle twisted harder, then stopped. Suddenly someone knocked, 3 slow, deliberate taps. Grace's voice trembled. "Go away." No response. Another knock. Then a familiar voice spoke, muffled through the door. "Grace." Her blood ran cold. "Victor, what do you want?" she breathed. His voice remained calm, eerily gentle. "Let's not play games. You know this only ends one way." Grace backed up until she hit the side of Edward's bed. "Why, Edward? Why are you doing this?" A long pause. "Loose ends," Victor finally said. "People who saw things they shouldn't have." Grace frowned, confused. "Edward didn't see anything. He's been unconscious." Victor laughed, soft, sinister. Oh, Grace. He wasn't unconscious when I met him. Not the first time. Her heart lurched painfully. What are you talking about? I treated him at another hospital months ago, under another name. He recognized me this week. He tried to talk. He tried to expose me, so I silenced him. Temporarily. Grace felt sick. You're a monster. I'm efficient, Victor corrected. Something you've made very difficult. Grace glared at the door. Because I won't let you kill him. That's unfortunate, Victor said. Very unfortunate. Footsteps thundered down the hallway. Security. Rushing back toward the room. Victor sighed. We'll speak again soon. Grace held her breath. Then she heard him walk away. Smooth, confident steps fading into the chaos of the corridor. Moments later, Dr. Renault and 2 guards appeared, pushing a gurney. We're moving him to the trauma wing, Dr. Renault said. It's surrounded by more staff and multiple access-controlled doors. Grace nodded, though dread gnawed at her. Victor would find a way. He always did. They carefully transferred Edward onto the gurney. Grace walked alongside them, refusing to leave his side even for a second. 2 guards flanked them, one in front, one behind. They moved quickly through the corridors, but every shadow felt like a threat. Every quiet corner made Grace's nerves spike. As they passed the dimly lit pediatric ward, Grace instinctively looked left. A figure stood at the end of the hallway, still, watching. Her breath caught. Stop, she cried. Everyone froze. Where? One guard demanded. Grace pointed with a shaking hand. Down there. Someone's there. The guards peered into the hallway, hands hovering near their holsters. Suddenly the overhead lights flickered, then went out. Grace screamed. The entire hospital plunged into darkness. Emergency backup lights began glowing red along the floor, casting eerie shadows up the walls. This isn't a power outage, Dr. Renault whispered. Someone cut it. A guard muttered. He's manipulating the system. He knows the schematics. Grace's eyes darted around the red-lit corridor. Somewhere in this building, Victor moved freely. A whisper traveled down the hall. Grace! Her entire body seized with terror. Keep moving, the guard yelled. They pushed the gurney faster. Grace grabbed Edward's hand. Stay with us, she whispered fiercely. Please. Security radioed for backup, but all they heard through the static were broken words and interference. Victor had jammed the radios. He was coming. If you're still watching, take a second to like this video and subscribe so you never miss stories like this, especially as the plot thickens. The red hallway lights pulsed faintly as Grace pushed closer to Edward, her fingers gripping the metal edge of the gurney. Every flicker made her flinch, imagining Victor emerging from the darkness with one of his silent syringes. The guards stayed close, their footsteps echoing off the cold hospital tiles. Almost there, one guard muttered, though his voice wavered. Grace didn't believe it. The hospital felt like a maze Victor controlled. Every corner, every door, every shadow belonged to him. She kept whispering to Edward, Hold on. Don't leave me. Not now. Suddenly a sharp metallic clang echoed through the hall. Everyone froze. It sounded like a heavy cart being knocked over. Deliberate, loud, taunting. Dr. Renault whispered, He's trying to lure us. The guard in front raised his flashlight and shone it down the intersecting corridor. The beam settled on a tipped-over linen cart. Sheets scattered across the floor like spilled ghosts. Keep moving, the guard behind urged. Don't stop unless we have to. Grace pushed the gurney again, faster this time. The wheels rattled over uneven tiles, each vibration making her heart race. A soft creak came from behind them. Grace's breath caught. She slowly turned her head. Someone stood halfway down the dark corridor they'd just passed. Tall, still, watching. Is that him? Dr. Renault whispered. Grace's voice trembled. Yes. The figure didn't move, didn't flinch. The red floor lights outlined a silhouette that looked almost unreal. One of the guards raised his voice. Stop where you are. The figure simply tilted its head. Slowly. like it was studying them. Grace grabbed Edward's hand tightly. Please, please move faster, she pleaded to the guards. The front guard stepped forward cautiously, trying to block the corridor with his body. Get to the trauma wing, he ordered. Now! Grace didn't hesitate. She pushed the gurney hard, the wheels screeching loudly as they sped down the hallway. Dr. Renault stayed close, looking back repeatedly. Then a loud crash thundered behind them. Grace didn't want to know what fell. She didn't want to know if it was Victor bursting toward them. She just ran. They rounded the corner sharply. The trauma doors came into view, heavy, reinforced with a glowing keypad beside them. Relief surged through Grace. Hurry! She cried. The guard in front punched the access code. The door clicked. They shoved it open and rolled the gurney inside. The guard behind them entered last and slammed the door shut with a force that made the frame shake. He locked the deadbolt. Then all three of them stood still, panting. Grace pressed her back against the door, trying to calm her breathing. This can't go on, she whispered. He's hunting us. Dr. Renault wiped sweat from his forehead. The police are searching every floor. They'll find him. Grace shook her head. They won't. He's done this before. He knows how to blend in. He knows how to disappear. One of the guards walked to the trauma wing window and peeked outside. Emergency lights only. Whole wing is dark. Grace leaned over Edward. His breathing was shallow. Too shallow. Panic tightened her throat. Dr. Renault his chest. The doctor hurried over. He's weakening. His adrenaline levels must be crashing after all this stress. Grace whispered. We need to keep him awake, or at least stable. Dr. Renault nodded. I'll prepare a temporary stimulant. Grace held Edward's hand again, rubbing her thumb gently against his skin. Edward, please. Please don't slip away now. You're so close. A tear slid down her cheek before she could stop it. Suddenly, a soft knock tapped against the trauma wing door behind her. Grace froze. Everyone turned. 3 taps. Slow. Deliberate. No, Grace whispered. The guard approached the door cautiously. Who is it? No reply. The guard looked at Grace. It's probably staff, someone trapped. Grace shook her head violently. No, don't open it. The guard hesitated. But protocol made him call out again. Identify yourself. Silence. Then, a quiet voice came through the door. Let me in, please. Help me. It was a woman's voice. Fragile. Trembling. Sounding like a terrified nurse. Dr. Renault whispered. That could be one of our nurses. Grace felt her stomach twist painfully. No, that's him. That's Victor. He's mimicking a voice. The guard frowned. You're sure? Open that door. The fragile voice whispered again. Please. He's coming for me. I'm hiding. Grace pressed both hands over her mouth to keep from crying out. It's him. He does this. He studies people. He imitates them. Don't open the door. The guard stepped back. We need visual confirmation. He approached the small glass window near the top of the door and leaned in. Grace felt her heart stop. The guard's flashlight reflected off the glass, creating a glare. He leaned closer, and the moment his forehead touched the glass, a face appeared inches from his. Not a terrified nurse. Victor, smiling. Before anyone could scream, Victor slammed something metal against the glass with brutal force. The guard stumbled backward, falling to the floor. Grace shrieked and grabbed the gurney, pulling it deeper into the room. Victor tapped the glass again. Slow, playful. He mouthed something through the window. You can't hide. Dr. Renault grabbed the injured guard and dragged him away from the door. The second guard drew his weapon and aimed at the window. He can't break through, the guard said, though uncertainty wavered in his voice. This door is reinforced. Victor stepped back into the red glow of the hallway. His smile faded. His eyes sharpened. Grace whispered, He's planning something else. Dr. Renault nodded grimly. He always has a plan. The remaining guards stepped closer to Grace. We need to barricade the entrance. Now. Grace scanned the room. The supply cabinet. The crash cart. Move everything. They shoved heavy equipment against the door. Metal carts, chairs, a rolling cabinet. Every movement echoed with desperation. Edward's monitor beeped erratically. Grace turned to him. No, 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 stay with me, she pleaded. Please. Dr. Renault injected a stimulant into Edward's fore. Come on, Edward. Breathe. Fight. The beeping steadied, but weakly. Grace pressed her forehead against Edward's hand. I'm not letting him take you. Not after everything. The guard by the window stiffened suddenly. He's gone. Grace looked up sharply. Gone? Gone where? He walked out of view. Grace's blood ran cold. He's not leaving. He's repositioning. Dr. Renault locked eyes with her. Grace, he wants you. Not just Edward. Grace swallowed hard. Then he'll have to come through me. She looked into Edward's pale face. I'll protect you, she whispered, even if it kills me. Somewhere deep within the hall, a faint metallic click echoed. Victor had found another entrance. And he was coming. Grace felt the air turn colder as the metallic click echoed again from somewhere behind the trauma wing. The guard spun around, flashlight trembling in his hand. That came from the auxiliary hallway, he said. There's a secondary service door behind those curtains. Grace's stomach dropped. You mean the one used for equipment delivery? The guard nodded grimly. If he found that entry point, he could already be inside this wing. Dr. Renault's eyes widened. We have to move Edward. We can't stay trapped in here. Grace leaned over Edward. We're almost through this. Stay with me. Don't leave me. Another faint click. Closer. Grace's breathing grew shallow. Where is he? Where? A shadow shifted behind the curtain. Grace gasped and pointed. There. The guard aimed his gun. Step out. Hands where I can see them. The curtain rustled. Grace grabbed a metal tray and raised it over her head. Ready to swing. The curtain slowly parted. A trembling nurse stumbled through, hands raised, eyes wide with terror. Please don't shoot. I hid in the supply closet. He's still out there. Dr. Renault rushed forward. Marcia? Are you hurt? Grace lowered the tray but didn't relax. How do we know she's real? Marcia sobbed. He killed the security guard downstairs. I saw it. I ran. I thought he was following me. Grace studied her carefully. Say something only a real nurse would know. Something specific. What did you tell me earlier today about Edward's chart? Marcia blinked through tears. That the electrolyte panel wasn't matching the vitals. That the trend made no sense. Grace's shoulders slumped with relief. It's really her. Marcia cried harder. I saw him. I saw him walking right behind me. He smiled like he knew where I was going. Grace reached for her. You're safe here. We're going to end this. The emergency lights flickered again. Dr. Renault flinched. Backup power is failing. We don't have much time. Edward moaned softly, barely audible but real. Grace immediately leaned closer. Edward? Can you hear me? His eyelids fluttered. A faint whisper escaped his lips. Grace, where? I'm here, she said, tears breaking free. I'm right here. He struggled to form words. Danger. Behind you. Grace froze. Behind her? She spun around. A tall silhouette stood on the other side of the trauma wing glass window. Victor. He placed both hands against the glass, watching them with cold fascination. Marcia whimpered and backed against the wall. The guard aimed his gun again, but everyone knew the bullet wouldn't penetrate the glass. Victor tilted his head, eyes locking on Grace. His lips curved in a slow, unsettling smile. Then he lifted something small into view, a stolen hospital badge. He pressed it against the card reader beside a side door none of them had noticed, an emergency maintenance access panel built into the wall. A sharp beep sounded. The side door clicked open. Grace's heart dropped into her stomach. He found another way in, the guard shouted. Victor stepped inside the trauma wing. Grace grabbed the nearest object, a metal four-pole, and positioned herself between Victor and the gurney. Stay back, she warned, her voice shaking but firm. Victor's eyebrows raised slightly. Grace, you've been such a problem. The guard fired a warning shot into the floor. Stop where you are. Victor smirked. If you shoot in here, you risk hitting your patient. I don't miss when I aim. Do you? The guard hesitated. It was all Victor needed. He moved fast. Faster than anyone anticipated. He lunged at the guard, knocking the weapon out of his hands with a brutal practice swing. The gun clattered across the floor. Marcia screamed. Dr. Renault scrambled to block Victor's path. But Victor shoved him aside effortlessly, sending him crashing into the crash cart. Grace swung the four-pole. Victor caught it midair, twisted, and ripped it from her hands. She stumbled backward but didn't fall. You won't touch him, she snarled. I won't let you. Victor stepped closer. You should have gone home when I told you to. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a syringe filled with a pale, ominous liquid. Grace recognized the vile brand. Fast-acting paralytic. He lifted it toward her. Move, he ordered. You're done. Grace's voice trembled. You won't get away with this. Not anymore. Victor smiled. But I already have. Look around. No police. No backup. No cameras. No witnesses, except the ones I'm about to remove. He lunged. Grace ducked instinctively. The syringe missed her neck by an inch. She grabbed a metal stool and smashed it into his ribs. He grunted, staggered, then swung his arm at her so brutally she crashed into a counter. Her vision blurred. Victor turned toward Edward. No! Grace screamed, launching herself at Victor's back. They both collided onto the floor, grappling violently. Victor pinned her easily. He was stronger, trained. He pressed the syringe against her throat. Grace felt the needle prick skin. Edward suddenly whispered hoarsely, Grace! Victor paused. For a split second, he turned his head. Grace used that moment. Every ounce of strength, every drop of desperation surged into her arm as she clawed at Victor's wrist. She twisted violently. The syringe slipped. Victor growled and tried to recover, but the guard behind him came back to consciousness long enough to shove Victor forward. Victor stumbled. The syringe jabbed into his own thigh. His eyes widened. No! Grace punched the plunger down with both hands. Victor gasped sharply, collapsing sideways. His limbs stiffened almost instantly. He tried to reach for Grace, but his muscles locked. The paralytic overtook him. He hit the floor, frozen, conscious, unable to move. Grace crawled backward, shaking uncontrollably. Dr. Renault pulled himself up. Is he alive? Grace whispered. But he can't move. Not for hours. The guard grabbed Victor's dropped handcuffs and secured him. Police burst through moments later. Flashlights, weapons, rapid voices. They surrounded Victor's immobilized body, reading him his rights even though he couldn't respond. Grace rushed to Edward's side, tears falling freely. You're safe, she whispered. It's over. Edward's eyes opened slowly, weak but aware. You saved me, he whispered. Grace leaned her forehead against his hand. I wasn't going to lose you. Hours passed. Edward was stabilized. Detectives flooded the hospital. Victor was transported under armed guard. Grace sat at his bedside long after everyone left. She held his hand, exhausted, relieved. But just as she finally closed her eyes, a detective knocked on the door. Grace, he said. We finished reviewing the security footage. She looked up tiredly. And the detective hesitated. Victor wasn't acting alone. Grace's blood turned cold. Another nurse was helping him, the detective continued. They were never in the same frame together, but we found evidence. And that person hasn't been found. Grace stared at him, horrified. You mean, they're still out there? The detective nodded slowly. Yes, and they know you exposed their partner. Grace turned her head and looked at the dark hospital hallway. Somewhere out there, someone was still watching. Grace couldn't sleep for the next 2 days. Even though Victor was locked in a maximum security medical ward and Edward was now conscious enough to speak in full sentences. Her mind replayed the detective's warning over and over. Another nurse was helping him. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined footsteps outside the door. Every squeak of a hospital cart made her heart jerk. She refused to leave Edward's side for even a minute, no matter how much the staff reassured her she was safe. Edward watched her with quiet concern. "Grace, you need to rest." She shook her head. "Not until they catch the second one." "You've already done more than anyone," Edward said softly. "More than the police, more than the doctors. You saved my life." Grace forced a smile, but fear still pulled at the edges of her expression. Someone else tried to help Victor finish the job. "What if they come back?" Edward squeezed her hand. "Then we face them together." It was the first time Grace truly exhaled. Later that evening, Detective Hall returned, holding a file. "Grace, Edward, we have an update." Grace straightened immediately. Edward reached for her hand. "We dug deeper into hospital logs, badge access, medication withdrawals. Every nurse and doctor has been accounted for except one." Grace swallowed. "Who?" "A travel nurse hired only 2 weeks ago. No real credentials. False identity. She and Victor arrived in the city on the same day." Grace felt her skin prickle. "Where is she now?" Detective Hall shook his head. "Gone. Left the state. But we issued an interstate alert. We'll find her." Edward looked at Grace, then at the detective. "She'll come after Grace before anything else. She'll want revenge." Grace's heartbeat quickened. "So what happens now? Do I need police protection?" "We're arranging it," Detective Hall said. "But I want you to know this. You're not alone anymore. And the second operative made mistakes. We'll catch her." Grace looked at Edward again. "You hear that? We're almost at the end." Edward nodded. "Because you refused to give up." The next morning, Edward was cleared to be moved to a private rehabilitation suite. Grace walked beside him as they wheeled the bed through a secure corridor. This one bright, open, protected, nothing like the red-lit horror they'd survived. When they finally reached the room, Edward held her hand before she could step away. "Grace, I meant what I said. I owe you everything. My life, my future. All of it exists because you refused to ignore your instincts." She smiled, tears gathering in her eyes. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Edward said firmly. "Not anyone. Only you." Grace didn't respond, too overwhelmed to speak. Then Edward took a small breath and said words that made her chest tighten. "When I recover, I'd like you to stay. Not just as an employee. Not just as someone who watches over my home. But someone who watches over my life. My circle is small, and you're the only person I trust." Grace looked at him, stunned. "Edward, I'm honored. Truly." He kept her hand in his. "Then stay with me. Not because of duty. Because you matter." Her tears finally fell, silently and softly. "I'm not going anywhere." As the sun set outside the hospital, painting the windows gold, Grace stepped to the balcony of Edward's suite. For the first time in days, she breathed deeply. Not in panic, not in fear, but in relief. She looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, one last threat remained. But she knew this time she wasn't facing it alone. The police were hunting the accomplice. Edward was recovering. The hospital had tightened every security measure. And Grace had become something she never expected. A protector, a survivor, a force. Footsteps approached behind her. Edward's nurse for the evening shift. An older woman with warm eyes and a gentle smile. "Miss Grace?" she asked. "Mr. Kane is asking for you." Grace nodded, giving the city one last look before turning back inside. The danger wasn't gone. Not yet. But the darkness no longer felt as powerful. And for the first time since the nightmare began, Grace felt certain they would win. Because the housekeeper who unmasked a killer had become impossible to break. And the next time any danger dared to approach, Grace would be ready. If you enjoy this story, please like, comment, and subscribe for more.